Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Rules and City Government Committee meeting to order. Please note for the record, both Alderman Arnett and Alderman Channelmeyer are present. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next item is approval of, business and miscellaneous. Approval of the minutes from the January 6th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next item is election of chairman pursuant to City Code Section 2.16.120. Every year, we have an election of the chairman for each of our standing committees. The idea is to give everyone the experience and the opportunity to chair various committees. So I will entertain a motion of a chairman for this committee.
I nominate Alderwoman Finlayson.
Second.
Okay, without further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you. And if at any point you would like to step up and chair this committee, please don't hesitate. Okay, next item is legislation. 02522, Revenue and Finance, Purchasing and Procurement, Prevailing Wage and Local Hiring. And I won't read all of that. This has been on our agenda a number of times. And for this meeting, we've asked that Director Gerald be present to help. Please come up. And we had asked that Director Dickinson be here. And I think she's going to be on call, I hope.
She's working from home, so she said she was available, but she couldn't come in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Office of Law.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to ask. Ms. Leonard, City Attorney, do you want to step up also so that we can get your opinion? And Ms. Gutierrez, are you here for this legislation or are you here for the rentals?
Rental.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Alderman Channelmeyer, this is your legislation. Do you want to give a brief prelude?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Before we let staff speak to it?
Yes, Madam Chair. 02522 was based upon, very heavily upon what Anne Arundel County passed for its prevailing wage legislation. My rationale being with a lot of infrastructure dollars coming up, I wanted to ensure that our workers would be going through proper apprenticeship programs and be paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. The initial legislation had some provisions that the staff took issue with, but after working with them over the past several months, we believe we've come up with a pretty good piece of legislation and a great compromise. I had one further meeting with the directors and Manager Malinoff yesterday to go through everything, and I'll hand it off to Director Gerald.
So do you want to take this time to go through what those changes were, what the issues were, and then how they were resolved? I'm not seeing it as something that's attached.
A lot of it just amendments, the Chandlemeyer amendments 1 through 7, and then Arnett Amendment 1A, which just clarifies stuff. Most of those were just some reducing some of the strictness of the regulations to make it easier on staff. There was one amendment that I made because I referenced a law that didn't actually exist, so we put the correct law in there. And that was the Annapolis Public Information Act versus the Maryland Public Information Act. And essentially what it does, it takes a lot of regulatory burden off of our finance team, off of our public works team, and puts the enforcement of this under the city manager or their designee.
May I ask Ms. Kalin, did we give a favorable or unfavorable to any of the 7 amendments thus far?
No, all of them were recommended favorably.
Okay, so we start from the beginning. So Alderman Channelmeyer, I'm going to ask you to be very specific in telling us what the amendments are, what they're correcting, so that we can respond appropriately.
Okay. Let me pull them all up. I do want to also state for the record, there is an updated fiscal impact note that was just posted.
Do we have that attached?
It is on Legistar.
So it's not,
Yeah, Ms. Jackson, could you, get that attached for us so we have access to it during this meeting?
Lots of things. All right. So Amendment 1 changed the director and department from the finance director and finance department to the city manager or their designee. And that was because it was felt by having conversations with Director Dickinson, Director Jarrell, and Manager Malinoff that the city manager would be best equipped to handle this type of regulation and overwatch. And then that was Amendment 1, and then there is Amendment 1A, which just goes through and ensures that city manager or their designee replaces the word director and department on every single thing, just to keep the language consistent. And those were each recommended favorably.
So 1A is simply adding to Amendment 1, substituting director and his or her designee throughout the entire document. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Amendment 2 is...
Do we want to vote on these individually, or?
They've already been voted on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I asked if we had voted on any of them.
Every single one's been voted on and favored recommendedly.
I'm sorry?
Including 1A.
Okay, so we have already voted in support of 1A.
Yes.
Okay, well, that was my question early on. So Amendment 2 has been voted on, and how?
Favorably.
Yes, favorable.
you know,
Okay. And Amendment 3, again, has been voted on favorably.
Mm-hmm.
And Amendment 4?
Amendment 4 was eliminating the specific number of 51% local hiring and putting in as best efforts to do majority local hiring, and that was recommended favorably.
And we voted on 4 also?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And 5?
5 was the goof where I made where I referenced the Annapolis Public oh wait, no, that wasn't 5. 5 was recommended favorably as well, but it's just referencing the Public Information Act requests.
Okay, but we do have a registered vote in favor of 5?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And 6?
6 was putting city manager instead of director for maintaining finance records, city manager, the designee, and it was also recommended favorably.
And we voted on 6. This was one that I thought there were some questions about as far as the line of responsibility.
I believe we voted on it favorably. Ms. Jackson, is that correct?
All of them have been,
So the thought process on all of those was not that the city manager himself or herself would be doing those tasks, but would be able to assign it as they saw fit to the department. So right now it's not clear which department between finance and public works is going to do what. So that'll have to be worked out. So it made sense to assign the responsibility to the city manager so the city manager can then assign it appropriately.
We are in the process, I hope, of amending the code that will require a staffing note to all legislation. Just like we have a fiscal note, we need to have a staffing note because we keep creating work that we put on people's plates. with little consideration, I feel, this is just me speaking, with little consideration for what's already on that plate. And so if we're going to be creating work, we need to be providing staff to do the work. So that raises this question, is one more thing we're putting on the city manager's plate. You know, the intent in creating the city manager, which I sponsored the legislation to create that position, but the idea all along was to create a department, not a single person who was going to be running the city. I mean, that's impossible. And we have not risen to the level of providing adequate staff. And Mr. Malinoff isn't here, but Mr. Jarrow, you were in this position. And it may sound like a small thing to say, well, he can delegate it, but it's still one more responsibility that has to be delegated. So do you think, based on your experiences, that this is a doable line of authority or responsibility?
Yes, I mean, certainly for the city manager, that's a one-time decision of who's going to be assigned it, so that's not an ongoing process. But there is going to be additional either contract or staff responsibilities associated with this. So that's what the fiscal note describes, although we're not able to figure out exactly what the total cost is going to be because we don't know how many of these are going to have to be done and how much effort it's going to take for each contract to do the monitoring. So I think the fiscal note says that we think if it's by a consultant, it'll be roughly $100 per hour fully burned, so profit, overhead, all those types of things, plus the direct salary of the person. But we're not sure how many hours each year would be required to do it because it's a new program and we just don't know how much effort's going to be required.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Arnett?
So harkening back to the staff report and remembering things that the finance director said, she felt there was going to be an additional record-keeping burden on both the contractor and the finance department. I never could get a full sense of, you know, how many contracts, well, it would be all future contracts presumably, and how much that level of effort would be. But I did get the sense from Ms. Dickinson that she felt that it would take up some considerable amount of time to do the record keeping. I don't know, maybe Mr. Alderman Schoenemeyer, you have a sense of what the level of record keeping is. I'm not familiar with this, or possibly the Office of Law would know what kinds of records we would be required to keep. And I assume the purpose for keeping records is to assure anyone that we are, in fact, doing prevailing wages. And that would be a continuing test that would have to be. Right.
We would have to collect all the certified payrolls from the contractors and then do some oversight to make sure that the employers are getting paid the proper salary or the proper wages. And then for some period of time, they would have to be kept on record in case there was a protest or a claim against those. So yeah, that's the crux of the issue. And then there should also be periodic, what we used to call in the federal government labor standards interviews done by somebody where they go out and talk to the employees and make sure that they're getting properly paid and getting all their benefits and not just rely on the payroll records, but actually talk to the employees as well. So all those are going to take some effort, and right now we just don't know how much that's going to add up to.
So if people are paid biweekly, as in the federal government, or weekly, or however they're paid, monthly, we would have to review those payroll records periodically, every time pay is given, and it would presume that somebody who's reviewing it would understand what the prevailing wage is. And
right. They would have the prevailing wages here, and then they would have the payroll records, and they could compare to make sure they're getting paid enough, and making sure they're getting the benefits that they're supposed to be getting, and aren't getting, dinged for things they shouldn't be, on the withdrawal side.
Do we have any, and again, I think this would unfortunately be something the finance director might have more than anybody else, but any indication that we're not paying prevailing wage on any of the contracts that we've let over time?
Well, right now, unless it's a Davis-Bacon project, because of federal funding, we don't have a prevailing wage. So we have nothing to compare. We don't have, a sheet of paper says you have to pay this amount. We allow the market to determine what the construction rates are. And right now, because there's so much work going on and such a demand for construction workers, pay has gone up a lot. So, I think for at least the near term and maybe the midterm, employees are getting paid very well. It's when the economy turns and the construction market takes a downturn and there's not as much work that this is a valuable tool to have.
There's also, if I may, Madam Chair, additional benefits to prevailing wage legislation because it has been shown to boost worker safety. It's been shown to boost overall worker quality, and there's several pieces of data and studies that I've shared with each of you showing that projects are less likely to run over budget or over cost.
But if I may rejoin on that, Madam Chair, how would finance, or who would be monitoring improvements in worker safety? I mean, I can't see that as, maybe our, who's the person that used to be Mary that would?
Yeah, Corey.
Corey.
Yeah, we certainly keep track of safety on our construction projects. That's a very big issue, both for contractors and for the owner to ensure that the jobs are safe. They have to carry insurance, the contractors do. So like when you have auto accidents, your insurance rates go up. If they have safety issues or accidents on project sites, their insurance goes up. So that's something that every contractor is very concerned about. So we can monitor that, certainly.
But we're monitoring it now?
We know when there are accidents or safety issues on contracts, so we don't actively go out and inspect to make sure that the project sites, they do that themselves. They're self-policing, but we know when there's accidents or safety issues.
So to say what I thought when I read the initial staff report is that there would be significant burden, but it wasn't clear to me that the juice was worth the squeeze. If we're going to be monitoring safety and training and things like that, which it sounds like we're doing already, and now we're adding a significant review of payroll records, which is going to take somebody time to leaf through, whether we review them quarterly or however. And then given the document that we received from the Office of Law that went through all of the processes that we go through now when we let contracts, I'm having a hard time figuring out what it is that we're improving and what it is that we're getting by adding this administrative burden to this process. But I will say that the tone, again, was my reading of the staff report was, and in fact, I think the statement was made on a recent contract, we only had one bidder, and it is very hard to get people to bid on contracts in Annapolis because of, although the rigor is already existing, are we in fact putting ourselves at a disadvantage in adding this additional burden? And I think that's where I'm coming down on this, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are we getting enough value added that it's worth putting this additional step in code?
I'm not sure that I can answer that. I can tell you that project that we just got one bid had unique circumstances because the Naval Academy was at the very same time bidding their seawall project, which drew the same set of contractors and was a much bigger project, so more appealing. So I'm sure a lot didn't bid on ours because they were bidding on that, including Chinbro, who was our favorite contractor because they did the bulkhead and they were the successful bidder on the Naval Academy. But yeah, I mean, that certainly is the sort of the question of the hour, and the policy decision that the council is going to have to make is, you know, you can find literature on both sides, right? Like a lot of things, you can find literature on both sides. Some say that it drives away bidders, some say it brings in bidders. It brings in the union contractors, which we would certainly welcome. We want as many to bid as possible. So I don't think that this is completely established whether this is a pro or a con. I think it has both pros and cons. We would hope that we could avoid some of the unintended consequences of this, of driving away non-union contractors who may choose not to bid on this. We would hope that that wouldn't happen, but we would hope that all the benefits that Alderman Chandelmeyer mentioned would come to our projects as well. You know, the safety, the staying within costs, the not driving the wages up, but getting at least equal quality. So yeah, I mean, it's debatable, all those things.
Test something with you. My sense is that contracts that are big contracts are likely to be contractors with unions like Whiting Turner and things like that. The one we have coming up with all the work on City Dock, is there a likelihood of a lot of non-union contractors being driven away?
Again, we don't know. We would hope that that would not be the case. We would hope that instead this actually opens the door to bring union contractors in addition. Most of our projects are non-union now, so we would hope that this would bring in the union contractors and there'd be even more competition than there is now.
Alderman Chandelmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add Whiting Turner's not a union contractor. They're an open shop.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Whiting Turner's not a union-based contractor. They're an open shop.
They're not union, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
I'm having a hard time with the echo.
Sorry. Yeah, they're not a union contractor, open shop. Just for clarification, as far as the safety standards that I was referencing, that doesn't come from increased monitoring. That usually ends up coming from people coming in. Prevailing wage contracts tend to bring people in, whether it's union shops or non-union shops, going through apprenticeship programs, which increases the overall training and has people, journeymen, working with apprentices. So that way they are watching, making sure that the job is done right, safely, and correctly. And that's kind of inherent to the prevailing wage program and the safety benefits that it offers.
Madam Chair.
One other thing, I apologize. As well as there's a couple data points, studies that I've shared with you all several times showing that the impact of prevailing wage legislation does not have a negative impact on total number of bidders. It does open things up to certain shops that may be unwilling to go into a prevailing wage jurisdiction or a non-prevailing wage jurisdiction because they know that they're going to try and be competing with firms that are keeping costs down, usually due through cuts in labor.
So on that last point, I recall you mentioning studies, but I don't recall having studies shared. I do make it a point to read the studies that you give us, but setting that aside, I guess I'm wondering if there's a return from this, as if we find that it is putting us in a disadvantaged situation, it's pushing the cost of our projects up, or for some reason we don't get the full complement of bidders. And I guess this is a question for law. The only way to return to where we are now is to have an ordinance to remove this from our code?
That would be correct.
What if we did a sunsetting? What if we passed this with a review in 2 years or something like that, that we could look at the whether it's been positive or negative, both for the cities but also for the workers, because really, as Democrats, we do worry about workers. more than most do, but
Yeah, I would just say that it takes a while to see the results from this, because you'll recall that when this first came up, I had reached out to the county, to the public works director there, because they've had this, I think, for 6 or 8 months, something like that, just to see what trends they're seeing.
yeah.
And it was too early at that point, 6 or 8 months after they had implemented to really have a feel for whether bids were going up, whether they were getting more or less bidders, all the things that we're concerned about. It was too soon to tell. So, 2 years may not be enough time to really have good data on what the impact is.
And who's going to be around 2 years from now? Just one.
Ashley?
Well, and you're making a good point about how long it takes us to figure out how it's functioning. We know that when we impose policies, sometimes it takes multiple years for us to figure out whether it's working or not. So the question for me is, should we put something in place that we're not going to be able to determine the effectiveness of it in a year or 2 or even 5 years? The fact that the county is working on it, in my mind, it would stand to reason that we'd see how it's working out there. We know what the financial implications are by virtue of the county, but do we know the other impacts?
No, and I'm not even sure we know the financial impacts yet, other than the fact that they had to hire a few people to administer the program. But as far as the impact on construction costs or other factors like that, I don't think we even know that yet. We just know what the cost of the county to administer the program is.
And that's what I was referring to,
Yeah,
the staffing
yeah,
costs, because we
right.
know that, but we don't know
Yeah.
much of anything else.
Right.
So. Ms. Leonard, did you want to add anything else?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I agree, especially given the county does probably more bidding than we do. So the problem is, depending on what you're bidding in any given year and what projects roll up, it could take a long time to see any trends, just because bidding's not like a consistent thing. Some bids are consistent, but then you have a lot of one-off type projects, so it's hard to tell.
Thank you. Alderman Gay, did you have your hand up?
Thank you. I'm sure he has, but have you sent an example of a city or municipality of our size using this, or have they all been of the sample sizes have all been of large cities?
Most of the studies and things have been done at either county level or slightly bigger city level.
Okay.
Okay, so we have already voted on Amendment 6, correct? Ms. Jackson?
I'd like to raise the fact that the amendment that I made to the legislation doesn't seem to be captured in the amendment ascribed to me. If you look at the
You're 1A, right?
Well, I had an amendment. If you look at page 3 of the legislation, there was under number 3, starting at line 6, it was any physical public betterment or improvement, but then B was acquisition of property of a permanent nature for public use, which I believe the city attorney told wages. So I had made a motion to strike, starting at line 9, the section B, which would be lines 9 and 10, and then amend C to become the new B. And somehow that
Okay, so we are still on 025, and we were discussing the last amendment, amendment number 8. And that's the Arnett Amendment that speaks to page 3, lines 9 through 10 should be struck. And we move C to letter B. So we clear, we don't have that in writing in front of us, but with your indulgence, we'll accept,
Yes.
um,
I can make that motion if you wish.
yes,
All right,
please.
so I move amendment number 8, which is on page 3, strike lines 9 and 10, and make old C into new B, small b.
Of order, Madam Chair.
Can you, are you not willing to second it, and then we can discuss?
Second, my
Okay.
discussion is purely a point of order question, either for you or for Ms. Jackson. We voted on Amendment 8 according to the January 6th minutes.
Yes, we're reading that, that's what we're reading. But we don't have it attached to the legislation for public. So I just wanted it clear.
Okay.
That we have accepted it in the notes, and we did vote on it. But anyway, I just didn't want any misunderstanding. We have 8 amendments, including 1 and 1A, which means we really have 9 amendments, but,
Fully understand. Got it.
okay. So are there any other amendments, or Mr. Gerald or Ms. Leonard, is there anything else you'd like to contribute to this discussion? It's like, no, please finish this as soon as possible.
No, I guess I would just add that we have had a lot of discussions with Alderman Schindelmeyer about this, Director Dickinson, the city manager and I, and we feel like that we've made great progress with the amendments, and that the bill is in a good form now to move forward. It's in a good form. We are supportive of it in its current form based on the amendments.
Okay, I won't go back and reiterate the staffing issues, because that's what, so, thank you, Mr. Gerald. Ms. Leonard, anything?
Nope, nothing further. Looks like a lot of work went into it.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve or not O-2522 as amended.
Favorable recommendation, Madam Chair.
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. A motion in favor of O-25.
Recommending
amended.
favorably.
It was recommended favorably,
Yeah.
yes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, directors. Okay, and we're on to O-5022, landlord and tenant relations, rent guidelines. Ms. Gutierrez, Ms. Lee, Ms. Leonard, I have questions for you also, Ms. Leonard, so if you'll join them.
Yes.
And Mr. Alderman Gay, who's out of the room.
I'm not sure if this is the one that I'm supposed to be speaking on, but
I
Yeah, there was
think we have
actually
you for the next thing, the general discussion.
Yeah.
I think he was just getting a cup of coffee from
The
the back.
rental assistance policies.
Well, let me ask,
procedures.
we have policies on our agenda, but the legislation has not been adjudicated yet.
Now, this legislation doesn't have to go to the planning department, right? Because it's not Title 21?
No,
It's Title 20, it looks like, of the
No,
Affordable
it's
Trust.
Title 2. It's Article 2. This is a charter amendment and a code amendment.
Oh, you're talking about O-50 now. I was going on to the policy. Could you call Alderman?
He's getting coffee, I think.
We're about to postpone it.
Thank you. I actually was going to suggest that anywho, because our committee has been consumed with 04022, and so we actually had not had a chance to have in-depth discussion on this legislation. I spoke to the council clerk this afternoon. I plan to have 05022 as the first piece of legislation we discussed at our February meeting on the 21st. And so if it was okay with you, if we had an opportunity to discuss it, draft some amendments, I have written recommendations from Alderman Arnett that we will take into consideration and then try to get a clean draft back to you before the March meeting. If that's fine.
That would be fine with me if, with the indulgence of chair legislation, so,
Okay, I appreciate that.
okay. So that means,
Can I just add
Sure.
a comment? One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with 040, in addition to this, is that both of them are going to be putting into code things that are going to be relying very heavily on rules and regulations. I mean, thinking about 040, the things that I'm very concerned about are never mentioned, and that is, what is the discount for a qualified workforce housing person in buying a market rate home? And the same thing for renting. What is the discount? In other words, what are we doing for these people? Setting aside whether there's actually incentives for any of this to happen and some of the other things. And the same thing here, some notion of what are the rent guidelines that we're talking about, so that we have a sense of what it is that we're approving to go into. That would be very helpful.
I definitely, I agree with you. In the first half of our meeting, we discussed, I said, it would be helpful if we have the guidelines added to the legislation. That's something that they typically don't do. But they can be added as a note to the legislation, not actually in the legislative format. But what I will say, though, is that, and one thing that I've learned in particular in working with the delegates office this legislative session very heavily on housing legislation, is the opportunities and the avenues that we do have for housing development. And one of the bills that we're working on is an adaptive free use legislation. And we're using a model out of Montgomery County, where they invested $4.1 million into a property in partnership with a development company for a vacant office building. And I kept thinking, similar to this bank where the old Bank of America used to be here on Church Circle. And so they invested $4.1 million into this property in a partnership. They created what was workforce housing to them, and it created 110 condos for sale. It was home ownership. The city or the county made its money back in about 3 years plus some. And the homes are almost sold out. It's about at 95% capacity. But a very, very small investment can spawn workforce housing. For a place like Montgomery County, workforce housing, it would fall into in between 60 and 80% of the area median income, much, much higher.
Wow.
In part because they're also using
Lower.
much higher.
60 to 80 AMI?
In the recommendations that we use, in the research that I've pulled, for a property like that, the income, what they define as workforce housing, was in between 60 and 80% of their average median income.
We're doing 80 to 120.
It is, but for an area like this, but that's for the ownership piece, I believe. I don't believe that's for the rental, because I believe the rental side is much lower. But that's something I can clarify for the staff. But anywho, I think that I'm just saying, with small investments, they used a $4.1 million revolving loan fund, and they were able to spawn 110 condos for sale at relatively low density. It was only, I think, 7 stories, and so 7 or 8. And so I just think, examples like that are what 040 would lean to, and I think it would meet your needs for housing ownership But with 05022, we just need to have an opportunity to discuss it. And I do think it will rely heavily on rules and regulations, but I don't think that's any different from any other program that the city operates, really.
That's my worry, because I'm thinking about the the moderately priced dwelling units. I know of one of them where the person who got the unit actually has more wealth than me, and I'm not saying I have a lot of wealth, but this person does, still got it, and they've had big raises since they got in there, and yet they're still occupying that MPDU.
I think I know, Annapolis is a small city. And that's something that can be addressed, obviously. If we know of something that is illegal, we should probably, well, it's not, I shouldn't have said illegal on the microphone. I don't think it's illegal in the sense of them committing a crime, okay? I think all rules or regs can be manipulated or taken advantage of. I think with 05022, the thing that I appreciate is that we are bringing in the board and to create a sense of community and to create dialogue between the two parties. One of the recommendations I've received is that the legislation should be amended to include at least one property manager or two property managers to the rental stability board. That's something that I think it should definitely be taken into consideration, so that it doesn't seem as that we're trying to be an authoritarian figure, but really provide leverage for our residents who just don't have that opportunity right now. And I know I've spoken to some of constituents in your ward and my ward and 5 as well that have stressed just the rent increases in these multifamily developments that we have. In looking at, for like studio apartments and stuff like that in the city right now, the average studio is about like $1,850. That's insane for a studio apartment. No. and so I just think that what we've seen, in particularly since the pandemic, that same studio, in 2019 may have been $1,675 or something like that. And so the progression of the rental increases is extremely concerning. And I don't think that the county housing is going to alleviate the issue as much as we believe, because, the Maris, which is just outside of the city limits right now, their studio apartment is actually $100 higher at about $1,900, depending on the framework of the apartment unit. And so all of those things have to be taken into consideration. I will admit that there are some of the smaller property owners, which I think by state definition are property owners who own 5 or less. I've looked around, they do have, units available here in the city. The problem I think that running into with those units is the conditions of the units. And so they run into the same issues that some of our other smaller landlords have. And those are all things that we could lend a hand to as well through our those in different ways. And so I'd love to,
I recommend that look at partnering with bigger.
Gentlemen,
I'm trying to bring in the banks this year to help. So.
well, and I have a bank that we've worked with in the past who has been willing and eager to help us. And the barrier was coming out with funding from the city. So I'd be glad to revisit that. Okay, let's go on before we lose our system once again. So we're postponing action on 050, and we're going to now ID 259.
Madam Chair, before we postpone
22. We need to, if you don't mind, we can come back and have that discussion, but we've already agreed to postpone it, have we not?
Okay.
Okay, so let's ask the staff, Ms. Gutierrez and Ms. Lee and Ms. Leonard, to come up and tell us about the policies. Nobody?
But she will be on.
Okay, I will come back to it. So I just want to be clear as to what this policy does.
Can you hear me?
Would you identify yourselves, please?
I am Laura Gutierrez. I am the manager of the Office of Community Services.
Hi, I'm Erin Lee. I'm the social work care coordinator for the Office of Community Services.
Ashley Leonard, Assistant City Attorney.
So this policy and procedure that we're talking about now is for the rental assistance program that started in January, so earlier this year. I'm not sure if you want me to walk through it or what questions you have specifically.
Well, let me ask Alderman Gay, is this the funding that you received from the state? So the policies are how that funding is going to be utilized in the city. And what's the level of funding that you were able to acquire?
So it's 3%, and please, Ashley, if I'm wrong, or I'm sorry, Miss City Attorney, if I'm wrong, could you correct me? But I think it's 3% of the hotel and entertainment tax annually.
I believe that's correct, yes.
And it's going to our housing trust fund, which is then put in this rental assistance fund. And applicants are eligible for up to $3,000 per calendar year. I'll let them get into the specifics of the qualifications, but there are qualifications. It resets every year. And
So how much are we talking about that you received for this fiscal year?
So it's about 200,000.
yeah, I was just, it was
About
about
200,000?
one and
Okay.
some change, yeah.
Okay. So the procedure is that you put the policy in place before you implement. So this is the policy that we have to say thank you for sharing this with us.
Okay.
Yeah, that's our role.
So this, I think, went into the newspaper for the month of December, and then I guess now this is the first time we're talking about it here. Okay, so the program itself is to help low and moderate income households pay rent, security deposits, and/or utility bills in order to stabilize the family's housing situation, prevent eviction, prevent utility turnoffs, and to provide security deposits for families in need of housing. In terms of administration, our office is administering it. The policy was written by Teresa Wellman, so she's overseeing the fund itself. And eligibility for applicants is that first they have to be city residents. The household income has to be at or below 80% of the AMI. And that's written in the second page specifically. That one or more members of the household can demonstrate a risk of homelessness or housing instability in the form of a past due utility, a rent notice, an eviction notice, and other evidence of such risks. The lease has to be in the applicant's name, and then they have to be employed or retired, and I think we are in the middle of a conversation about whether that is going to end up being expanded or not. But for now, that's what was in the policy is employed or retired, and then that they have to be living in a property located within the city with an active city rental license. So those are the main.
Madam Chair, if I could speak to just one.
Alderman Gay?
Thank you so much. So as she mentioned, one of the eligibility requirements, number 5 in particular, states the applicant must be employed or retired. The reason that and I got some questions about this from some of the property managers as well. The reason that we put the employment requirement in was because this fund is so small. And if we would have had the fund include individuals who were unemployed as well, we would have went through the money and, it would have went very quickly. And so one of the things that we are going to add into this, and Teresa's prepared the amendment, I believe, and it'll be adjusted, is employed or employed within the last 90 days. And so if you have lost your employment, let's say in December, and obviously, you would have fallen behind on bills by like and by February, you'd still be eligible to receive assistance just so that you can keep your place. And so that is one of the tweaks that we will make. And so that'll have to go, if I'm not mistaken, again, we'll have to put it in the newspaper for 30 days. And, we would at some point like to get to the discussion of tweaking that policy, just because, as we've made changes to this and as we've had to publish this, we've had to use funding from the Rental Assistance Fund to publish this in the Capital Gazette, et cetera. And so it's becoming a little bit costly, but hopefully this is our last change, though.
May I ask how many, if someone is unemployed, they've recently been unemployed, this amount of money is to allow them to have a place to live. Is there any?
So currently, if you are unemployed, you do not qualify for this benefit.
Okay, so if you've recently lost your job, you're eligible.
Not right now. That's the amendment.
Okay, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, we want to make that change that gives, people that wiggle room, but it was not added in the original, and that was my fault. It was completely my fault.
Okay, so that's the amendment that you're looking for to add, unless they've recently lost their job. So what happens after, what's the frequency? 12 months, $3,000?
So within a calendar year, a person can receive a maximum of $3,000 in assistance.
Okay, I guess.
So we have people who have applied for much more than that. They need, $20,000 in assistance. Somebody that has asked for $400. So that number varies in terms of what their current need is.
Do you grant $20,000?
No, we can give a maximum of
So
$3,000.
maximum is 3,000, but there's no minimum?
There is no minimum. Well,
Okay. All right, Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for doing this. It's about time we get this off the ground. I do have some specific questions, which I'll start with, but my big question is going to be the same as the Planning Commission had on the workforce housing, which is the level of management this is going to require. It's ironic, Sheila, I was talking to somebody just today about how you and I argued for a long time that we should have the Office of Social Services, and we're glad, but we think we're only halfway there in terms of the number of employees and the amount of things we can do. But I am worried the more successful these programs are, the more work it's going to take. And so I want to talk about the overall management. But on point 3, one or more house can demonstrate a risk of being homeless. And that sounds great to me. It appeals to but how do you demonstrate that?
so the second part of that says exactly how. They have to have a past due notice, a rent notice, an eviction notice, or evidence of that risk.
Okay.
And I think one of the amendments too, if she has not already sent it out, that I think we should include in that is that it should not be the eviction notice. It should be the intent to evict notice, because if we wait till they receive the eviction notice, they'll be evicted. We can't go back. But if they've received that 10-day letter 10-day letter of intent, then we would be able to help them. And so just because the language is iffy, I know that we would know that, but.
So that to me would fall in the other evidence of such risk.
Oh,
where
perfect.
It's the
Okay,
intent to evict.
awesome. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, so let me be clear. We're not going to amend this.
No, the catch-all language at the end, other evidence could include
Right, okay.
something like
Perfect.
that.
And then you are going to add to 5 employed within the last 90 days? Is that going to hold up the program? If we have to go back out and re-advertise in the paper to make this amendment?
I mean, will we still be able to process that?
It will probably be a little bit of a delay, because in theory, it won't, under Title II, it won't be an adopted part of the policy till it goes through the whole process.
Yeah.
I mean, so you could move forward with the rest of it, but that piece would have to wait. Like, people wouldn't be able to qualify under that piece until that gets fully
Okay.
done.
All right, as long as we're talking about refinements, I'm looking at big section D, and we're putting in the specific income limits, but those are not fixed forever. The AMI changes all the time, so shouldn't we be saying, as of such and such a date, or illustrative is 62,600 for family of one?
So
Because those numbers will change.
that was actually in there. I'm not in, and it says these are the numbers for 2022, but not in this version. I think maybe because it was the draft version versus the published. I'm not quite sure, but on our website it does say that is. So I will go back and check why this document
let's get
doesn't.
that fixed, because as AMI goes up, and hopefully it does go up, that would mean more people could be qualified. So we don't want that to be locked in time. So again, the only other general thought I had, which is a thought gratuitous since we don't approve or disapprove this, is that the more successful we are, the more management this is going to take, the bigger number of people we're going to have in the pool who are going to get this kind of assistance, which hopefully, like UBI, will keep them in their unit instead of being kicked out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Schellemeyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you for the great job you've done with this program. You were able to help out a constituent of mine, a retiree who, due to the housing shortage and the housing crisis, was having a lot of difficulty keeping up with rent and some of the last actually genuinely affordable housing units that aren't subsidized. And that made a world of difference to her. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Gay?
Thank you. Just 2 quick points. I don't think there need to be an amendment for D, because it says, as defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So would it, as you read it, would you just be able to go back and look then at the department's guidelines? Because I think they republish their guidelines annually.
It does give you a little bit of wiggle room, but it would be nice to have sort of an asterisk or something.
These are hard numbers.
Okay.
So they're locked in.
Yeah, if you didn't have the hard numbers under it, I would agree with you completely, but with the hard numbers under it, it kind of blurs that a little bit, so you probably need a little extra.
So what if we remove the numbers and just update the income structure on the website annually instead, so that the legislation just refers people to the HUD website, and then our website will have this.
That works.
Okay, all right, perfect. Yeah, just so that we don't have. I just think and then lastly, I just would like to say, this team is phenomenal. And I know in the budget, I will be supporting all of their enhancement requests. No, seriously, because the work that they do it goes unnoticed, but it doesn't go unnoticed because people have, just mentioned the support that they've received from this office and the nonprofits that they partner with. It's just them and three interns?
It's 2 interns and 1 grantee.
It's them, 2 interns. And so, and they're chugging along. And so a part of what will need to be funded is our internship program, because, there's an intern running that is helping run this program. She meets with Laura, 21 years old, and she's managing all of the applications, helping process all of this stuff, to take the burden off of their hands because they are dealing with direct constituent responses. And then you have the other intern that's doing on the ground work, actually just hosted the violence interruption conversation over in Robinwood. And so, I definitely think that they should be fully funded, as you all have been pushing for forever. And, we should get them at least 2 more full-time staff positions if we can. So definitely thanks.
Well, I agree with you in part. Well, I'm realistic. We created this department to be our Department of Social Services. And I feel that anything that's new that comes down the pike, it's dropped on them. And I think that's unfair. We really need a Department of Housing that speaks to housing issues. And while and the interns that they have, the 2 that they have, are excellent, no question, and they leave on June 30th, which means they will be 2 more people short. They're already 1 person short now. We should be staffing the Department of Community Services appropriately to begin with, and adding other departments as are needed. You know, I've said this 100 times if I've said it once. We cannot put more on already full plates. Their plates were full to begin with, okay? And we've added, myself included, I put a program on your plate. And so I'm not talking about everybody else, I'm talking about all of us collectively. We need to do better, and we need to have this honest discussion, and I am having it with the mayor and the city manager about how we can truly staff this department and be able to provide the resources we need to all the other programs that we create that need staffing. And so I'm also, as I said earlier, I'm going to sponsor a code amendment that will require a staffing note with every piece of legislation, because it's time we stop creating legislation without the who's going to do it. Because the assumption is our staff is great, and you will continue to accept whatever we send your way. Well, no. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you in part. I don't agree that it should be a Department of Housing, because what we're doing, what I did today with Karma, people need food too. They need clothing, they need health care, they need prep to get into the educational system. Social services, housing, of course, particularly in weather like this, is a huge issue, but it's not the only issue. So I see your mission as being bigger than housing. I think we really need to flesh that out more fully. I'll just tell you a short story. My sister Mary Ann works over at Tyler Heights, and she got a call from a mother who needed help. She was out of housing. She was living in her car until her car was demolished, and so now she had no place to live. But kids apparently now, on their birthday, bring in cupcakes to give to all the other kids in the class. And she didn't have the wherewithal to make cupcakes, so she was looking for help, which of course all the teachers got together and they made the cupcakes, and the kid had a nice happy birthday. But one of the things that came out of the Stockton Universal Basic Income was 25% of that $500 a month they got went to food. I mean, stuff in your tummy. That's pretty basic, and I think it is huge. It's not as much as being out in the cold at a night like, or weather like this, but it is really important. So we have a lot of social needs that we need to be thinking about. Not housing is critical, yes. So is food, so is clothing, so is health care. Getting people to prenatal care so we don't have the terrible death rate that we have amongst poor population. I mean, we're like third world country when it comes to survival rates from pregnancies. But it's a very bifurcated distribution, as is most things in this country. Anyway, enough.
And it's not new.
No, it's not.
And it's not new, unfortunately. So we can have this discussion to determine exactly what is covered under this department and whether we need other departments. So that's a discussion for another day. So is there anything else we need to know before we give this our blessing? Because that's all we get to do with this.
Oh, I think that's. Anything else?
Ms. Lee?
I was going to say nothing more on my end, but I'm just so delighted to hear, that you placed your trust in us, and we're just so excited to help the citizens of Annapolis, and we're happy in what we do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that's official. We've given it our blessing, I assume, from everyone. And I'm not being offensive by using that terminology. I hope no one sees it that way. Okay, so let's go back to now 05022. The sponsor of the legislation has decided to postpone. So we need an official action to postpone for this committee, 05022.
Motion to postpone?
Second?
Okay, further discussion? Thank you, ladies. Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Alderman Chattermar, did you have something else you wanted to add about this?
Yeah, just while we were discussing rents and the obscene cost of rents in not just the city of Annapolis, but also the general area, I pulled up apartments.com, America's most reliable website for finding an apartment or any place to rent. Just imagine Jeff Goldblum saying that. There are currently that you can move into today in the area of Annapolis, including the county part, Edgewater, Arnold, up to Sherwood Forest. 5 places to rent for $1,500 or less. It is really, really bad out there. So I appreciate my colleague coming forward with something to address it. I think rent stabilization is more of a symptom treatment than like the cure-all, but we're on the same page on that front. But it is a Band-Aid, but it is a Band-Aid that will be life-changing to some people. So I'm looking forward to diving into this one.
Thank you. May I ask you, Alderman Gay, has the law department weighed in on the legality of rent control? And is that what it's called?
Well, it's not rent control because this is not the first time that I've tried this. I've tried it previously as rent control, and that was struck down. This is passed in Rockville, Maryland. I've essentially used the same format. Thank you very much for the research provided by our policy analysis. It was down to 2 options, really, this and Montgomery County. And again, I think the board just creates structure that is not a mandate, but a firm recommendation. One of the problems, though, that we will have to address in the legislation, and I've talked to actually some individuals from the building lobbyists, and they're like, well, it's too vague on what the punishment would be. And so we'll have to address that. So, that, again, we're not, taking away rental licenses if you don't comply with this act, but we'll have to figure out what exactly it is we will. I think maybe if it's a strike system or something like that, because the purpose is not for people not to be able to make money, but to prevent an overburden of rent increases on citizens. And lastly, the state is also has rental legislation or rent control legislation up that would require certain policy recommendations and also extend notifications to residents to up to 120 days. This legislation only does 90 days. And I actually just found that out through the town hall with Delegate Henson. She spoke on that. And so we would, at some point, assuming that the state may pass this, be in compliance. And actually, our legislation is less strict than what the state is putting forward right now. So, but we still need to get through these amendments, though.
There's also my apologies.
Alderman Shettlemar, go ahead.
There's also a key fundamental difference between rent stabilization, which is what this is tackling, versus rent control. Control locks in the rate entirely in place. Stabilization just controls the amount of rate, the rate of cost increases. So similar but different enough to warrant a key distinction.
What I was going to ask is that in your discussion with your committee, that you make clear the differentiation between the two. And if the state is looking to pass their own legislation, I assume enabling legislation for all jurisdictions, is there a need for us to pass legislation if the state is planning to do something?
I think that's something to follow because I'm not sure that the state would have the support in the Senate or the House.
Yeah.
But if it does by March look like, well, I mean, I'm sure I'll have to look it up because I'm sure it have to be in committee by February if it has life by April. And so I'll figure it out. But I think we should still just try to get these amendments together just in case. And then just also get the mood of the council, And I know the small landlords will want to testify. Like I said, I've had some discussion with lobby groups, and I've had some, landlords concerned. And no disrespect, I said earlier, small landlords who have properties less than $1,500 are lack the quality living conditions. I did not mean that to anyone. I meant some properties. I'm so sorry if I didn't clarify that.
Thank you. Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I read Ms. Leonard's treatise on our ability to do this, and I have the sense that if people want to take it up, it's implied that we have it because other municipalities have it. If I'm mischaracterizing, I will happily be standing correct. So I hope the state does something. But I want to focus on what I hear more about from my renters. It is precipitous rate increases, but it's also that the properties are not being kept up. I've gotten from what is it now, Nautilus Point, former Watergate, where there's just terrible conditions going on. And some of in Eastport, a lot of single-family homes were converted into multifamily homes back when Eastport was a cheap place to buy houses and do that. And now they're very old, and they've been done a long time ago, and they're not in very good shape. And they call me and say, who can I complain to about my landlord? I don't have an answer for them. We don't have the auspices to do that. I don't think the county does either, but if they do, I don't know who it is. But it's not just the rent, it's also the conditions. And so I think that when we get into this more fulsomely, and particularly after the state does whatever they do, that we need to think about things other than this, the rental rate. So that's down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We did vote on that, so I think that we have exhausted our agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.